Artanish, hello everybody. Hello Vyrdkin. Hello everybody who is joining us from our fandom and from Kickstarter. Welcome to this latest update for DasVlog, and today we're going to talk about Shamanpunk. Now, was originally going to talk about diversity, and in a way we are going to bring up that fact, but we are going to have an entire episode that just talks about that in general. Now, let me back up here. So, punk or punk is a way to describe technology or a flavor of how something is kind of expressed. Diesel punk tends to focus on early technology, mostly from the 1930s to 1950s. I'm probably going to get corrected about that. Steampunk is specifically to steam technology. Cyberpunk is, well, it's cyberpunk. It's dealing specifically with implantation, and there's biopunk, which is more of the augmentation via genetic engineering, and let's just say it gets kind of complex and over the top. I mean, there's even dreadpunk, which describes kind of like turn of the century Lovecraftian horror stuff. So we have a lot of these punks. Now, not all of them are like well known. Some of them are very niche, and some are very new, like Shamanpunk. And I'm going to tell you where this comes from, but I've got to tell you kind of where I got the idea. So first, there's this book. It's called The Way of Kings. It's the first in the series called The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. And in this book, you have these airships that fly through the air, and they're paddled. They're put together with bamboo. This is a world where you have different, things that are created based upon a technological folklorish idea that was taken from China. And, the mythology that we often paint to the Far East. And so Ken Liu took this stuff from his own culture and he wove it into a story, and he calls it silk punk. And I read that and I thought, why aren't more people doing this? Why aren't more people taking fantasy and taking, elements of things that we often do? And we do that, but we often mostly focus on a very specific thing. We have elves and dwarves, and even then when we mix it up, they still kind of fall into those, specific tropes. So I wanted to do something different, and when I was growing up, I was really fascinated by different groups, like the Mu faith, the indigenous faith that's found in Korea. That is, it's shamanic, and I'm going to get into the definition of shamanic. The Shinto faith of Japan. My cousins are Japanese, so I've kind of had that infusion from a young age. But the big thing here is, and what I'm saying specifically is this: shaman, by definition, are individuals who are possessed by spirits. So when we see a medicine man doing something for a Native American tribe, it doesn't mean he's a shaman, or she's a shaman, or they is a shaman. Okay, we often mass, generalize what is a shaman. In anthropology, it is specifically someone who is possessed to commune with the spirit, and that's kind of an element I was playing upon. The other element I wanted to play upon is this idea of, indigenous folklore, taking ideas and culture that is often, we often, fantasize and we fetishize it. And I wanted to actually just have it as part of the world, One aspect of the book you're going to see is this clash between highland and lowlanders, and that's actually an aspect that happens a lot in parts of Southeast Asia. There's a clash between the South and the North that occurs in parts of China. I mean, in Japan. Actually, South and North, that's actually a thing in China. But that deals with, invading peoples from the North. That actually is a thing, too. The Whale Riders are part of that trope. There's a group that reflects the idea that the West is strange and weird rather than the East, and that's kind of a deconstruction. But why this is shaman punk? Well, first, we have shaman. And the reason why I chose these guys is because I like the benders from, the Avatar world of, Legend of Korra and Avatar the Last Airbender. I like the idea of people who have a specific element they can control and weave. And so I started playing around with that. And the thing about it is that the concept of there being, 4 elements of fire, wind, water, and, and earth, or that's actually not necessarily true. China has its own take on it. In the Legend of the Five Rings, there's fire, earth, metal, and I believe wood and void. So, and I'm going to get corrected. I'm pretty sure I didn't get those right, but I think you're getting to the point. The definition of what is an element is often been defined by, what the Greeks and other, Western civilizations defined as elements. And so I was like, well, why don't we take this concept? Why don't we create, shaman? We go with very simplistic ideas. We'll go with kind of like how there's benders. There's earth benders, fire benders, water benders, air benders. So it's like, okay, we'll have these will have one elemental shaman, this elemental shaman, that elemental shaman, and the shaman can have special weird little abilities that are specific to their particular element. And so after a while, I was like, what are these elements? And at one point, I just said, well, of sea, stone, and sky. So this is how we got the idea of the elements being based around landmarks, based around features of the land. So we have sky, it makes sense, rather than just air shaman. They're sky shamans. They represent the sky goddess. And that was another element, aspect that I loved about Avatar, and about another thing that inspired, which was Zelda, which is this kind of very simplistic naming thing that happened. There's in the legend in Avatar, they have names for spirits, but the spirits are pretty they're not homogenous, but they're just these fantastical things that come from the world of the spirits. So it's like, well, why don't we do that? Why don't we don't need complex mythologies. We can have a very simplistic mythology that gets complex based upon how the people interpret it. So we ended up creating this world that is often inspired by a mixture of different peoples. The Skybound are a mixture of Japan, China, parts of Africa, and Hawaii. A lot of their culture is based on the Kapu system of ancient Hawaii. The Clouded Mountain tribe are specifically based on a mixture of Salishan and Ainu, especially with their dress. Their dress is very Ainu in design, and I wanted to do that because a lot of people don't know about the Ainu. And it's like, well, the only time people are going to see these things is if they've seen, Princess Mononoke, or they specifically type in Ainu dress. I was like, well, why don't we take some inspiration, take some ideas from this? And then this way, when people go, well, where'd you get that? I'm like, it's based on Ainu. You should check it out. They have a very fascinating, interesting culture, and it's something more people should know about. I have this weird thing where I don't appropriate something. I don't turn into a costume, but if I see something very fascinating, I like the idea. I give it credit, and I go, I got the idea from this. This is something people have been doing for hundreds of years. I saw it, and I thought it was quite inspirational. But we're getting off track here. So the idea with Shamanpunk is that the basic way how I'm defining it is that the magic and the technology is keyed into the relationship between people who have the spiritual connection to the divine. And it sounds a little weird, but the best way to put it is shaman can connect spiritually, like their souls. They use a little thing called a talisman. It's made of bone or wood, and it allows them to connect to their element. Sky shaman can see currents of air. Earth shaman can feel and sense currents of lava and tremors in the air. They can also touch wood and feel the life of it because plants are connected to that. And then there's specific animals they can bond with, such as stone shaman bond with bears or big cats most often. Bone shaman bond with animals with tusks, prominent bits of ivory. So some have bonded with walrus, actually, strangely enough. One or two have done that. Most bond with mammoth or with saber-toothed tigers. Sky shaman mostly bond with gigantic, birds called rocks, and so that's the idea. The other thing is they have a spiritual connection to the animals because the animals are speaking animals. They're animals that exist a bit beyond the spiritual. So when we often read stories, when I grew up, I read Salishan stories about where whales come from. I used to play this game my mom helped create that tells the story of Raven stealing the sun from a chief and giving light to the world. So that was an aspect I wanted to have, and it also brings me back to Wizard of Oz with the talking animals. So that was the other thing, though. The animals themselves are connected to the land, and they are part of the spiritual aspect of the land. So shaman connect and work with animals, and they're able to do fantastical things because of this. It all goes back to the notion that shaman are people who commune and bond with spirits. So in Shamanpunk, you need characters that are based specifically around their powers coming from spiritual connection. So basically, it's if I say this in a D&D sense, they're all clerics and druids. There you go. Otherwise, it's basically a form of magic that's very limited. It's like the telekinetic power of benders. The seers can kind of make storms at some point, but most shaman, they can't make waves. They can work the waves. They can, a whale rider knows how to maneuver the currents. They can not just maneuver them, they can manipulate them. So they can ride a wave up and come out and stab you, and they can also manipulate the water in the air to a point to make it strike you, but they can't just, create a water whip like Katara can. Any of the, if you've ever seen this, they're not hydrokinetic, they're not pyrokinetic, they're not telekinetic powers. Their power comes from the connection. They stop touching that talisman, they lose their power. So that is the connection aspect. So essentially, the big thing we wanted to do with this is we wanted to tie into this shamanic concept of, bonding with spirits. And most of my ideas come from a mixture of what I know about Shinto, what I know about traditional concepts that we've often seen in parts of Hawaii, a lot of what I know about Native American, specifically Salishan, Straits, and Coastal. For those of you who aren't from Washington, I have friends who are Lummi, and so I grew up from the reservation, so I have a lot of experience, hearing about this sort of thing. I got lectured about it as a kid. So a lot of that comes out in the books, these ideas of things. And there's even the stories when they tell about it. I try to reach back to, epic heroes and sort of things. So this is a bit like what you'll read in like Greek mythology in a way. And that's kind of the sense we get it. It's very mythical. It's very, out of there when it comes to how the world works. But at the same time, it's a world where the shaman have to interpret what the spirits want, what they're trying to do, and then there's a lot of other things part of it. But that's kind of what Shamanpunk is. It is a world where you have people that inspire a connection or have a connection to the land, and when I say the land, I mean to the world, and they exist as kind of these conduits to the spiritual, the physical, and the metaphysical. It's kind of the abstract concept, but that's what Shamanpunk is. It's also good that if you use Shamanpunk, that you take from, the older concepts of religion. Don't go Judeo-Christian with it. Go older. Go Old Norse, even there. But you need to have this idea of people who let the divinity possess them, and that is actually, in fact, what shamans do. They are letting a power overtake them. Their bond with animals is they are submitting to something. There's a very complex thought behind it. And eventually a shaman will talk about it in the book, but at the moment they touch the talisman, they see things, and that's the basics of it. There's a few other abilities, but it's specific to the shaman who haven't appeared in the book yet. So we'll get that when we get there. And Pyramid of Evil. Well, I hope that helps you guys. Feel free to put questions down in the comments. Send me questions via DM on our at Shadowed Sin, and for Twitter, or even on Facebook or Tumblr, and we'll answer them all the best we can. Well, that's it. And as the Amazons say, spirits to you, Vechen Shush.